Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Parent Pivot Podcast. I am one of the hosts, the uglier one of the two. Not uglier, but Steve Cummings. Go ahead.
I'm Julia Cummings.
Anyway, we are excited and thrilled to have with us Justin and Trisha Davis. They've written a book called One Choice Away from Change. And, as I just think about that title, when you think about transformational change, it's like, how much am I going to put up with what's going on? And I can make a decision. And so to have a choice that I do want to change, we talk about this a lot on our podcast.
Yeah.
And we talk about, hey, you've got to focus on yourself.
Yeah.
And you've got to take care of you. And then all that flows out of your to your adult children.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So anyway, I'm sorry. Justin and Trish, welcome to the Parent Pivot Podcast. I'm going to let you guys give the biography background of who y'all are.
Yeah, we'll share the fun stuff. Justin and I have been married for, it'll be 30 years in July, which is easy. We got married when we were 12.
Wish that were true. We're just that old.
We have 5 kids, and
wow.
I love what you guys do, because it is, as we've become parents of adult children, our oldest is going to turn 20? 9. That's crazy. That's crazy.
I know.
So we have a 20, almost 29-year-old, and then a 25, 22.
26. He'll be 26.
Oh my gosh. See.
Oh my gosh, you sound like us.
Maybe we're not good parents and should not be on this podcast. And then we've got he's in college.
29, 26, 22, 17, 15.
For the record, everybody has had birthdays, so, but
it gets confusing.
Wait, so between youngest to oldest is, like, if I do the math right, is that 14 years?
It is. We have 3 biological kids. Our oldest 3 are biological. And then 7 years ago, we adopted our youngest 2, Jalen and Janiyah, and they were 7 and 9 at the time.
I gotcha.
And they are the oldest of 5 siblings, which we are still very connected with. The younger 3 got adopted by another family. So we're a very blended family in a unique way.
Yeah. And you're parenting and partnering all at the same time.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Refereeing in there somewhere as well.
Totally.
Great. So you guys decided one day you woke up and it's like, let's write a book, or is there other background to how you got to where we are today? Because you've written other books, and we will be putting your book in the show notes and highly publicizing it, from what I now know, for a long, long time.
Yes.
Because Julia has read the book, and we promoted the Yurkovich's book. How We Love.
Yeah. I'll get more into that.
You'll get more into it. Okay. Yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So we lead a ministry called Refine Us Ministries. We started it in 2010, really just as an overflow of our story. We have been married, obviously, for 29 years, but 10 years into marriage, our marriage imploded due to infidelity. And so we got out of ministry at the time in 2005 and never thought we were ever going to go back into ministry. And then in 2009, shared our story for the first time at a church here in Indianapolis, where we live now. And God just began to kind of unfold this redemption story that we began to share and travel and speak. And that led to our first book in 2013. And then just God began to open doors for us to help walk alongside couples and help them restore hope and renew relationships in their life. And we now have a ministry that we do full time called Refine Us Ministries. And we help couples through coaching and then also through writing and speaking.
Nice.
You guys are busy.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things where when you feel called to something, it doesn't necessarily feel like work. It feels like it's just an overflow of who God has created us to be. And so we've been able to see a lot of great places and be with a lot of great people, but also share, just the message of restoration, redemption, and transformation is really our heart.
Yeah, I love that. Transformation is key. And I Steve and I, as I read the book, there were so many analogies you used, so many things you said that are things that we say all the time. And one of those was just the idea of white knuckling our behavior all the time instead of transformational change, knowing the why beneath the what, things like that are just so important. And one of the things that we talk a lot about on the podcast is just self-awareness, self-reflection, figuring out the things in your own life that perhaps need to be changed and transformed that can transform your legacy and transform your relationship with your adult children. So this book speaks to that mightily. It is an amazing book. Anybody who's listening or watching, you guys, I cannot emphasize this enough. You know that I have all said a bunch of times, I've recommended Milan and Kay Yurkovich's book, How We Love, which of course is a phenomenal book. I think it's therapy in a book. It is great questions, great reflection. This book is going to be my other book that I recommend. Yeah, Steve held it up. And it just goes so deep and helps you just ask some hard questions. So tell us the catalyst for writing the book, where it came from, why this moment in time, what was happening. Just share with us.
It's so interesting to hear you. Well, one, I love what you guys do. I just want to acknowledge that. And I'll let Justin speak to that question. But I think those of us listening, we are on the cusp of transition. That when Justin and I started sharing our story, what we made a commitment to is that we wouldn't just share, that we would become expert listeners.
Yes.
And what we recognized is, I would say 50% of the people we work with have been married for decades.
Yes.
And now they've entered into kind of this season of almost empty nesting or empty nesting, and nobody's talking about it.
Right. Exactly.
And so this like hiddenness and unintentional shame, and it's like, okay, I've never heard anyone share this at Bible study and so here it's just a good example of how something that, while what this book was birthed out of hardship, sometimes we get stuck in cycles just out of natural human development that we just didn't even see coming.
Right.
And so I'm so grateful that this conversation is being had, because it's one that I feel like people in this season are desperate for.
Yes.
Which really leads to why we wrote the book.
And Julia, you mentioned it, so many people like white knuckle their way through Christianity, where we feel like, okay, when I signed up to be a Christian, what I was promised was life and life to its fullest. Mm-hmm. And we get to a place where, whether we go through, relational conflict, or as our kids, leave the house, we look back on our life and think, this isn't really what I signed up for. This isn't really what I thought it was going to be. Something must be wrong with me, because I'm struggling with the same things at 48 that I struggle with at 28. And we're having the same arguments 25 years into marriage that we had 5 years into marriage. And so what is wrong with me, or what is wrong with my faith? Because everybody else seems like they have it all together. And so we think, I'll just pray more, or I'll just go to church more, or I'll read the Bible more. And we do all of these religious activities, but it's not bringing us the transformation that we feel like we've been promised.
Come on, preach it, Pastor Justin.
The heart of the book really is to set the reader free, to let them know that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and you're not as stuck as you think you are. And the key to the change that you really desire is not in trying harder.
Right.
And it's not in giving more effort. It's in surrendering more. Yep. And recognizing that, the surrender that you think about is not a loss. It's not, a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of wisdom. Yep. And strength, because it takes a lot more strength to surrender to God's transformational power than it does to try to earn your way or improve your way into better relationships.
Yeah. And I think you've nailed it right there. Just I speak a lot of this in the ministry that I have. We talked about on the podcast is we're alone, and we're not communicating with other people because shame holds us back. And then we find out if we take that mask off, like you mentioned, Trish, it's like some of these things don't happen in church. We walk through the doors and we put a mask on, and how you doing? I'm good. And it's like, no, I'm not. We're all lying. 100% of us are all lying, but there's no safe place to be vulnerable and authentic and share that stuff. And then when you do, you find out, oh, wow, I'm not alone and things. And this is part of the transformational power, because God's always at work and always redeeming. And I'll shut up because I keep on saying the same thing over and over again.
No, that's okay. yeah, there are so many aspects of it. And of course, it's not till you're in later in the book that you actually bring up the idea of shame, but and you build on that. So I don't want to miss the building blocks. But excuse me, but that problem with shame just excuse me, everybody. That problem of shame just keeps us so stuck in the mud and the cycle there. One of the chapters I love was right before the shame, in talking about fear. And I was in tears at this one because I could relate so much to so many things that you were talking about. And when Trisha talked about your vacation to the beach, oh my goodness, man, I could relate with that because I'm like, that is so me. Like just the
Okay, wait a minute. So I'm in the dark. What happened on the vacation to the beach?
Well, she can share.
Okay.
You know, like you have expectations of, for us, it goes back to that question of you don't know what you don't know. And then when you do know it, then you're faced with a choice of what you do with it. And this vacation in particular was coming at a time where we had just planted a church. We had just adopted the kids and we just needed a break from just being on. And so this is the first time that all of my bigs were coming. And it was supposed to be like this perfect.
We rented a huge house so that we could accommodate everyone. Everybody would have their own, room, because it was a big deal to have all of the adult kids there at the same time. My mom flew in.
Yeah. And so it was a condo on the beach. It wasn't a house, but it had 3 bedrooms. And so we walk in and it is like a scene out of CSI. Like it is the tile is broken. The refrigerator has bugs in it. And it said it had this 360 view of the ocean. And there was a huge building being built next door that had real-time workers on it and saws. And everybody else was trying to like get, like it's okay. And I melted like the Wicked Witch of the West. I melted. And then it rained every day. And in my mind, I left frustrated because I thought I was tired and I needed rest.
Right.
But what I recognized is, although that could have been part of it, the heart of it is I was fearful. Mm-hmm. I was fearful that if I didn't make this moment with my kids, I was fearful that if I didn't get this rest, like everything hinged on this moment for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And what I recognize is that fear can actually be a tool that we can purpose and repurpose to make wise choices. Mm-hmm. But for many of us, we've been taught that, fear, if you feel fear, then you have failed and you should feel shame for being fearful.
Right.
But fear wakes us up. It wakes our senses up to go, okay, why am I here? And we get to break that cycle of fear by saying, okay, I can have agency in this moment. And in this moment, I realize there's something bigger going on in my heart and mind, that I got to a place that I put all this expectation on 4 days on the beach with my family.
Right. And the reason why I could relate so well with that is last summer we had, our kids are all grown, married. 3 of them have kids. One of them doesn't. But we all traveled. We rented a big house in Central California in the Sequoia National Forest, because that's where my youngest and his wife
They work
live.
at a Christian camp, Hume Lake Christian Camp. We can say that on our podcast.
We can give Hume Lake Christian
Shout out to Hume Lake.
A plug. And so we rented a cabin and we all went up there. I had the same thing, that fear of, what if something goes wrong? What if one of the kids don't get along with each other? What if it's all ruined? What if blah, 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 blah? What if? It took me less than 24 hours to have a complete breakdown. And my youngest son said, Mom, come drive with me. And he just said, Mom, you got to chill. He said, everything's going to be fine. And he said, I need you to just relax and enjoy this. And I was able to cry and kind of pour my heart out a little bit about, where I was coming from and that fear. But that fear rose so quickly. and like you thinking everything relied on this. And so I can just relate to that overwhelming, and I'm sure a lot of listeners can.
Sure.
Where at this stage of our lives, where we've got these adult children that we want everything to be meaningful so we never lose them.
No fighting, no disappointments,
Yeah.
no pain, no
That's
worry, no
statement.
suffering.
Yeah.
That's a good statement.
Yeah. So I felt like that fear chapter was just, of course, like I said, it's a building block, one of the building blocks in all the chapters, but that one really like stood out to me, and how then it can all shift into it's shame and things like that. So, thank you for that.
Was that just a personal reflection, Trish, like on the way home, that you kind of sat back and went, what went on here? What was it that was the catalyst for helping you step outside yourself to see that? Was it more just like going, my expectations just didn't
total intervention on Justin's part. Total intervention of like, let's have a conversation. He was my younger son in that moment of just, but I think there's a difference that we had to learn, the difference between advocating for each other and shaming one another, even when we were intentionally shaming. And Justin just did a great job of somewhat refereeing me from the rest of our family, but entering into that space to make me feel seen and heard, but then also to encourage me to say, you do have a choice. You can be miserable the rest of this vacation, or you could go play a board game. It's not the beach. It's not. And I think fear like blocks your mind to think rationally or think like, so just that pause was like, I call it that, like the 2-year-old freak out and they're like, like kind of get it back together. It was like, okay. So yeah, it was really totally just Justin intervening for me in that.
Yeah.
And Justin, I would say, I've been through that with Julia quite a few times. And I think for husbands who might be listening to the podcast, without getting into the detail of that, what I'm hearing is some of the common parts of walking our wives through that is having just a gentle tone to our voice, not shaming you into going, what does it matter with you, woman? Just get over it. That doesn't work, but I'm assuming there was a lot of validation, sweetheart. I get it. I mean, what are some of those dynamics that you went through?
I think when you're talking about, trying to break cycles, the key is understanding why and not what. So it was easy to understand what. It was raining. There was construction workers next door banging at 6 a.m. in the morning while we're on vacation. Our vision, our view is impeded by this building. She forgot to talk about the dead flies that were in the refrigerator. So we all knew what, but understanding why, like, why does this mean so much to you? Why does this feel so heavy to you? Why is this life and death for you? Like, trying to understand your spouse's heart in a situation like that goes a lot further than trying to fix something. Right. There was nothing I could do to fix it. Right. And so I think when you talk about, when you do an inventory of the behavior of your relationships and the things that are repeated, most of the time, the reason that they're repeated is we try to fix them in the moment rather than understanding them for the long haul. And so that was really my heart in that situation, because nothing productive is ever chosen out of fear. Right? Yes. Like we don't necessarily ever choose anything that is going to build a relationship if it's out of insecurity, out of unmet expectations. And so trying to get to the heart of that, I think, is really important. Yeah. And we all know who's whispering in our ear when fear is driving us, in our whatever. Sometimes it's just hard to step out of that. We talk a lot about that, but even as we're relating this to a husband-wife situation, the same we go through with our adult children, and walking through the same stuff. So it's not just this is not a marriage podcast today, folks. This is like, hey, if we can walk through this in any situation with any of our adult kids or even elderly parents, and things, and you recognize this is what would help.
And you guys do say that in the book. I mean, this is about relationships. It's not about necessarily husband, wife. One of the things you guys tell a lot about, you tell your own stories. You both have had really difficult things in your lives. I read abuse, divorce, betrayal, um, betrayal of both your mothers. Finding out that your dads were not your dads. I mean, you guys had a lot. And
And you can
most,
spiral out of control and let that overtake you into addiction and broken relationships
right.
and pass it on to your kids. But you guys chose not to do that.
Right. And they actually talk a lot about that in the book. But one thing that strikes me is I sit here and I say, wow, that's a lot. But everybody has a lot. It just, all the a lot looks different.
Yes.
And the emotions remain the same. So one person may experience complete poverty and not have anything. Another person may experience, a broken home, things like that. But in that person's world, it is a lot, no matter what.
Yeah.
And sometimes we lose sight of that. And you kind of touch on that a little bit with comparing your worlds to others. And anyway, your vulnerability in the book is amazing, and just being willing to talk about that. But let me ask you, in writing any of your books, not just this one, and I haven't read the others, which I will want to read now. How did you get to a place where you decided that you needed to look inward, that you needed the transformation and not just the fixing?
Well, I think one, it was a journey, and it was brought on by coming to a crossroads where we felt like we have created the best family we can on our own strength. And it wasn't yielding the type of fruitfulness and connectedness that we desired. And so it was really a decision to say, okay, we can't try to fix each other anymore, and we can't try to fix ourselves. We have to, Trisha has a saying, what is yours to own, what is mine to own, and what is ours to own.
Right.
I like that.
And so sometimes I think it's easy to see what is ours to own and what is theirs to own. But until we can start with what is ours to own, then nothing changes. And so it was a decision that we both made individually of like, okay, if nothing changes in our family, we can control ourselves. And so thankfully we both went on this journey together, but it has kind of spilled over into our adult kids. And I think sometimes as parents, especially of adult kids, we do operate out of that fear, and we try to pretend like we're better than we really are, or that we have it more together than we really are, because we don't want our kids to see us struggling. We don't want our kids to see us, maybe doubting our faith, or struggling in our marriage, or struggling at work, or in a relationship. But what we do when we shield our kids from the imperfections of our life is we also shield them from the power of God's grace.
Amen.
Yes.
And our kids don't necessarily understand the power of grace because we act like we don't need it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm here to fix all your problems, not God.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when Trish and I got to this place of desperation, it allowed our kids to be a part of not just the brokenness, but also the rebuilding. We found out in 2021, within 6 days of each other, that our dads weren't our biological dads.
Wow.
So our kids were all adults at that point.
We're not related, just in case you're wondering.
Our dad is not the same person.
No.
I half wondered as I was reading the book, are they going to find out that they're related?
Because here in Georgia, you can marry your cousin. So I don't know what the law is in Indiana.
You live in Indianapolis, Indiana, not Southern Indiana.
There you go.
Justin, please strike that. No.
Hey, so here's a curious question I have as I hear you say that. Your adult kids are watching this with you guys. What changes or conversations of the good have you seen come out of that we can encourage our listeners to, hey, take a step back when you own this stuff, or when these things come up? Yes, it's a horrible thing, but this is the impact it's had on our adult children and our family.
there's recognizing these universal truths of change. And
Yes.
it is true for everybody. And that is, you can't change another person's heart. They have to choose it. So regardless if I'm the parent or I'm the child, I can't change another human heart. And so there's a relief in that to go, okay, I can show up my best self and know that I can ask the questions, what is mine to own? But even when you know that there's something someone else needs to own, it doesn't mean that they're going to do the work.
Right.
And so our kids watched us, we talk a lot about grief and how grief has been spoken about, especially in the world of psychology from a framework just to help people understand. But then in Christianity, we kind of took that and made it this rigid, this is how you grieve. And so our kids getting to experience in real time how everybody grieved differently, specific to this time of us finding out our dads weren't our dads, it affected our kids too, because their history was now being rewritten. And so it was learning how to hold space for each other in that, and not saying, okay, now's the time that all together as a family, we're going to shift and we're all going to be mad at the nanas, or that we're going to forgive. It was individualistic in this collective holding with one another. And I think if Justin and I were to have held back and curated what we thought they needed to hear, then we would be capping their ability to adults. And they are adults. And they're not 50-year-old adults. They're 20-somethings that I can't place 50-year-old expectations on them. But I will tell you, there have been times that our kids have walked in and spoken some hard, beautiful truth over us. And I believe it's because they had a clarity and a freedom of living in a family of truth to have the strength to be able to carry what they didn't have to carry that Justin and I did. And it was beautiful and powerful.
And what's cool about what I love hearing you say that, Trish, is they've said they know your hearts, and they know that they're not going to get lambasted by mom and dad, that you're going to listen and listen well. And we're to the point with our adult kids where they've done the same thing with us and things. I don't know if I've handled a situation, whatever, one of them will come to me, hey, Dad, I know what you're intending to do, but, it's almost like this is how I experienced this situation and whatever. And he knows I'm not going to get offended and take it out on him, but I'm actually going to sit back and learn from that. So there's such a strength in that, because we want to raise, or at least influence, mentor, partner our adult children to be these responsible, loving, caring, faith, God-fearing believers that know who they are, that they can carry that down to their grandchildren and so on. So when I leave this earth, it's like we've done everything we can to be who we are in full transparency and honesty.
Well, one of the things that one of the things we share with our kids is God doesn't transform who you pretend to be; it really transforms who you are, right? And so, in order for us to experience that transformation, we have to be willing to be our authentic selves. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to pretend to be something that we're not. And that's our kids, for better or worse. Sometimes I wish they would pretend they were better than they really were. But for better or worse, they have embraced that value, and it's allowed us to break some of the cycles of our past and some of the cycles of our parents to experience something new in our family.
We can learn so much from our kids, no matter what their age is. I'm sure even, you've had now 5 teenagers, and sometimes they're just so much more honest than anyone else will ever be. And so we can learn a lot from what they tell us, and they call out our blind spots often. And if we have too much pride as parents, to not listen to our adult children who are now adults and have their own experiences and all of that, I think we're so missing the boat if we don't have respect for them and what their viewpoints are. I just think that's key. Um, you tell a story, Justin, in the book about calling your son. You talk about your shame cycle with your dad.
Mhm.
And then you talk about talking to your son when he was in college and what he spilled out to you. Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense now looking back, that my dad is not my biological dad, because he was a fisherman, loved outdoors, he was a mechanic, worked with his hands. All of my brothers love Harley Davidsons like my dad. They love fishing like my dad. They love hunting like my dad. I hated it, all of it. Not the least mechanical person alive. And my dad would consistently make me feel like I was not man enough, or not macho enough, or not masculine enough, because I didn't like hunting. I didn't like fishing. And I got into sports because I had nothing else really to do to try to earn my dad's approval. And I got really good at, and so my family got into basketball when I was in high school because I was on the basketball team. But up until that point, I never really felt like I was ever good enough for my dad. And I resented hunting and fishing and anything outdoors, camping. I hated it all.
Mm.
Well, when my middle biological son, Elijah, was in college, we got into kind of this knockdown, drag out argument over the phone because of his grades. He's brilliant. And he had a presidential scholarship because he got a 26 on his ACT. He had like a 2.7 GPA, but he, knocked it out of the park, or maybe he got a 30 on his ACT. 28. Yeah, 28 on his ACT. So anyway, so he gets all this money, but he's not pulling his weight academically, and he's going to lose this scholarship. And so we get into it, and he just starts getting very emotional and telling me how I love the other two boys more than him because they love basketball and he doesn't like basketball. And it just hit me that basketball for him had become hunting and fishing for me. And it was just this epiphany for me that I had taken that cycle that I experienced and I had placed it onto him. And every ounce of shame that I felt at 17, 18, he was now feeling at 18 and 19. And so I had to make a decision. Was I going to just blow over it and say, get your act together and start getting good grades? You don't have the right to talk to me that way. Or was I going to identify that this had become a huge wound in our relationship, and unless I addressed it and got help for it, that it was going to continue to drive a wedge into our relationship?
Yeah.
So what did you do?
Well, that was the beginning of a lot of therapy. No, I started going to counseling. Yeah, and I started going to counseling. He started going to counseling at school. He started seeing a counselor at school, and we just really started having very honest conversations. What's so ironic is he and I are the most alike of any of the other two boys, personality-wise, idiosyncrasies, how we think and respond to situations. We're the most alike, but because we didn't have something in common, it began to cause him to feel a lot of shame. And so it was interesting. We had a book release party last Thursday, and we asked each of our adult kids to come up, and Trish interviewed them about changes that were made in our family that have affected them. It was amazing. And Elijah, who this story is about, mentioned this story. And he said, when I was reading the book, Dad tells this story, and he's like, I'm just so thankful that we went through that. And so we all went out to dinner. Elijah couldn't make it to dinner after the thing. And I texted him and I just said, one, thank you for being there tonight. Thank you for sharing. And I'm so grateful for everything that we've gone through to get us to where we are now.
Yeah.
And it was just this amazing moment for him to highlight something that was a very big wound, 6-7 years ago, that has now become a scar that we can look back on to see healing.
Yeah. I kind of have a similar story with our youngest, Jackson, and it's probably like our number 2 most listened to podcast, because as I travel for work, I work for Redeemer City to City, that was founded by Tim Keller. And as I'm meeting with ministry partners, more often than not, I'm finding another dad my age, and they're telling me about their boys, and a similar situation where just not connecting. And, we're trying all the things that we've been told to do, where we watched our dads do, and they're just not working. But we did a podcast with Jackson, and I entitled it, "I'm Going to the Sidelines as Dad," because we did not connect for 18 years. And he came, same Jackson, or same son that she talked about at the Hume Lake story. But he was more coming from the heart and going, why do the other two respond to me well and this one does not? And so we were sitting there, and I've told this story many times on our podcast. We turn the microphone on and off we go, and we're going, and Jackson's sitting over there. I'm going, okay, he can ask us anything he wants. And then Julia turns to me and she goes, I want you to tell the story about that breakfast before Jack and Liz went to Spain. And immediately I'm starting to relive it. I'm getting choked up. The long and short of it was, I just said, hey, I've gone as far as I can as dad, and I'm going to go to the sidelines. I'm not checking out of the game, but there's going to be some other men who are going to speak life into you and father you in ways that I have not been able to. At the same time, I was having a difficult situation with my own 87-year-old father, and I had to kind of cut off communication while I went through therapy, because I knew God was going to redeem this relationship. I told Jackson, I said, Jackson, I will be watching you as one son relating to a father and you and stuff, to see how God's going to redeem that. And he did. Our relationship is awesome. But, it takes the dad to take the lead on that and surrender and saying, this isn't about your position and influencing authority. Like, I'm dad and you just need to do this because I'm dad. That is a prideful dad. I've seen too many families implode and they're still separated. We have some even in our own family where a dad has chosen to do that. And it's like you weep for them because they're choosing to make it about themselves.
Yeah.
On stuff. I did have one question. You mentioned that you resented your dad for what was going on. Fast forward, I've been to seminary. I got my Master of Divinity. I've got this thing stuck between my ears, all in the head, blah, blah, blah. I've heard the Father, God this, and we're all children of God, things like that. But I had what I call a father eclipse, in that every time I heard the word father in church, up pops the image and the voice in my head of my earthly father. Did any of that ever play into you needing to kind of break away from that to really experience the love of the Father and the identity of who Justin is as a beloved son?
Yeah, I mean, that's a phenomenal question. When I first found out that my dad wasn't my dad, it flipped my world upside down.
Yeah.
And my identity was completely, just wrecked. Like, yeah. I for a whole year, I brushed my teeth in the kitchen because I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror. Like, it was that devastating.
Wow.
And, I found out when the song Good, Good Father came out. And at that time I was a campus pastor of a church in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I'm required to be at church. And here I am trying to reconcile this brokenness with my earthly father and trying to point people in the direction of a heavenly father. I couldn't even be in the same room when Good, Good Father was saying. Like, I just had this visceral response to it. And it took me a long time. I think it's Louis Giglio who said, God isn't the reflection of your earthly father. He's the perfection of your earthly father.
Right.
And it was that truth that I needed to move from my head to my heart. And it took a while. It took about a year to get there, where I could realize that God didn't do this to me, and God doesn't abandon me like my earthly father has abandoned me.
Right.
And work through some of that. But it was a journey, and I had all the answers, right? I knew all the biblical truth,
right?
But sometimes that stuff gets in the way.
Oh yeah.
Quite honestly.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I had to say, okay, this isn't about what I know. This is about my experience and the faithfulness of God.
Yes.
And allowing my experience of God's faithfulness to catch up to the knowledge that I have, so that I can actually receive the love that God had for me. And thankfully he was patient.
Yeah.
Trisha, what about you in your situation? Because you guys have the same essential situations, different, but the same. How did you react to that with God and all that?
You talk about betrayal trauma, and you know this as a therapist, and there's different kind of theologies, different methodologies that people believe. But the idea of like secure attachment, asking those core questions of, am I loved? Are you going to be there when I need you the most? And that was always answered by my dad. And so he and I had a great relationship growing up. And then when I left for college, my parents ended up divorcing after 25 years. He came out as a closet alcoholic. And so there was a lot of past wounds that I didn't even know existed. And so our relationship was really broken into adult years. But for me personally, my dad is Hispanic. He's a short, little Mexican man, and I'm blonde haired, blue eyes. And so we don't look alike, but we are so much alike. Even features of, I joke about our fat feet and our button nose. And so I had spent my whole entire life growing up being asked if I was the mailman's daughter. And I think that would have led to scars had I not had that secure attachment with my dad. But I did. So that wasn't really a wound that I grew up with. I just thought people were dumb. I had other words for them, but it was just like, why would you ask that? Well, my maiden name's Lopez. And so people would ask me all the time. And so now at 48, finding out that my dad wasn't my dad, then all of a sudden, all of that proving that I was dad that my dad was my dad became a wound. Like, oh, I was wrong. I have been living a sham of a life thinking I'm Hispanic and very much in Hispanic culture for 48 years. And I am a lie. So there were so many layers of betrayal. Justin, when he had an affair 10 years into our marriage, it was with my best friend. So a prominent woman in my life. Now another prominent woman in my life. And so it could have gone very much in different ways. But for me, the through line is that God was the only one who hadn't betrayed me or lied to me. So he was a good father. Yeah. Even when I challenged him and I was angry with him and had this theology that if I loved him and, loved Justin, we should live this up into the right life. And when that was taken away, I say, I'd hit rock bottom, but I found God at rock bottom, and he told me that rock bottom's still solid surface to stand. And so he had been holding my hand through all of that. And the beauty of what Satan means for harm, how God uses for good. Sadly, my father just passed away in January.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. It's still kind of just even weird to say, but the longing that I wanted to get back to of being chosen by my dad, that I felt like I had growing up till I was 18, now telling my dad, who had no idea I wasn't his daughter, having to tell him was one of the worst days of my life. But in the end, it brought us closer. And he chose me in a way I had been longing for him to choose me when I thought he was my biological father. And so when he passed away, kind of hours before he passed away, he said, I apologize for being a bad dad. And I just said to him, no, Dad, we're good. Remember, like we're healed. Our relationship, like we have mended what has been broken. And if I could, encapsulate all that we're talking about today, is we talk about all the hard because everybody has hard, and that's true. But then we forget that there is good. And we do get to step in that good. And so is my dad more of my biological dad because we have a healed relationship? No, that will never change. But what has changed is through the power of grief and forgiveness and choosing honesty and choosing God through the power of the Holy Spirit to transform only what he can. There is good on the other side of it. Maybe not in the way that we thought, but I think that's what my kids are experiencing on this side. It's not like a messy, free life, but how God met us in our mess. Some that were created, some that were created for us, and that God's going to meet them in their mess today, tomorrow, and forever. And it's just it's a life-giving posture to live from.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was this reminder too, watching Trish and her dad walk through that process. It was this reminder that it's never too late. Right.
Yeah.
Like it's never too late. Like her dad chose her after he found out he wasn't her dad, and they chose reconciliation even late in life. And that was so encouraging.
That's you guys, you both have such an amazing story. I want to ask you both.
Before you do, can I just put a quick commercial?
Yeah.
Right. So if you're listening to us, I know I held this up once. Justin and Trisha Davis have written the book One Choice Away from Change. The subtitle, Break the Cycles That Hurt Your Relationships and Hold You Back. It's available, I'm presuming, at Amazon.com, as well as their other books. We highly, big bold letters, underscored, exclamation points, recommend you reading this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I want to ask you from the perspective of a child, an adult child of older parents, how you talk a lot about forgiveness, reconciliation, healing, all of those things, but and Justin, you said it took you a year to kind of get through some stuff. We have a lot of listeners who have contacted us where their adult children aren't talking to them.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking stories. Unfortunately, it's not a common practice that the adult children are listening to the podcast. We have had some reach out to us. When my daughter puts us on TikTok, that seems to work. So we've gotten some responses that way. But as children who have been horribly hurt by your parents, what best advice would you give? Hopefully, if we have other adult children listening, what advice would you give them to pursue healing?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good question. And it's probably something as parents of adult kids that we're all asking, right? Because we've all wounded our kids to some degree.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I've realized that's been really important for me is consistent humility, not manipulation. When I feel like I'm being manipulated by a parent to try to get me to see them in a way that they want me to see them, or they need me to see them, that is repellent. When there's genuine humility and contrition that isn't dependent on how they feel, that has been healing balm.
Okay. I like that.
And so that would be my initial response. The next thing I would say is, I just had I just had lunch with a guy and we were talking about this, and he just felt like he had to fix it all at once. And I just said, it's kind of like your youngest son, chill.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't necessarily have to fix this all at once.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take away the pain and the sting of that situation, but surrendering it and giving into a process rather than an event is going to help you see your child how they need you to see them, not necessarily how you need to be seen. I think as parents of adult kids, going back to your guys' story about the vacations, like, we feel like we have to make this happen and it has to be this way. Right. And if it's not, then it becomes about us. And it doesn't mean that parents don't have needs in a relationship with their children, but it might be setting those needs aside so that you can see your kids how they need to be seen rather than how you need them to see you.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. Trisha, do you have something that comes to mind that?
Oh, that was really good.
You don't have to say anything.
Speaking about forgiveness, I mean, that's a huge piece of who we are as believers in Christ. I don't always necessarily want to forgive. In fact, my word for the year this year, you're going to laugh at this, unoffendable. I am trying to go, Lord, why did you give me the word unoffendable? Well, I get offended easily because I got a ticket the other day for the first time in 30 years because of someone who offended me, and I had to get around them. I don't know why I went off on that, but anyway, forgiveness plays such a key role here, and you talk about it. You give 5 misconceptions about forgiveness. Are there 2 of them that are some common misconceptions about forgiveness you can share with our listeners?
It's so great because that's what I was going to touch on, and I'm like, well, maybe that's steering the question in a different way, but there's the aspect that what Justin talked about, and then there's the heart aspect of the how, and like, how do you walk that out? And forgiveness is our gift of how. And forgiveness is free, trust is earned. Those are 2 totally different conversations.
Say that again.
Forgiveness is free, trust is earned. So
Yep.
you have a parent who maybe struggles with narcissism or struggles with, I talk about in one of the chapters, getting past your past and recognizing you could be in the same car accident, but depending on where you're sitting, you're going to experience the same accident in different ways.
Yep.
And so learning how to understand our parents and understanding our adult children and their perspectives helps. It doesn't make one wrong or right, but it is the reality that we're dealing with. And sometimes we don't choose to forgive because we're trying to prove our point is correct.
Yes.
And until that's done, then we'll forgive. But forgiveness is free, and you can offer it regardless of how the person responds, because it's what Jesus did for us.
Yeah.
So forgiveness is what keeps us from responding out of bitterness or resentment. So that's I would say that's the starting line. But walking it out, and I know we use this word boundaries a lot. It becomes like Christianese buzzword.
Yep.
Totally.
Yep.
Yeah.
I believe that boundaries are the most lavish acts of love that we can provide for the people we love. Because boundaries say, I may not like you, but I love you enough that I want to be proactive in being able to engage you in a way that doesn't bring me into unhealth.
Wow.
And keeps our relationship as healthy as possible. And sometimes, sadly, the healthiest relationship possible is not being in relationship. And that's brutal, especially when you read the Bible and it tells us to be the hands and feet of Jesus. It seems counterintuitive.
Right.
I think when we reframe boundaries as an act of love rather than a means of punishment, because it very much can be, then it changes our trajectory to be able to talk about our past without dehumanizing our parents or dehumanizing ourselves. I just told my kid last night, my oldest, we were talking about they're kind of in the process of, trying to get pregnant. And I was like, oh my gosh, Micah, I did everything wrong with you. Like everything. And he's like, and I'm the most healthiest. I'm like, I know, like physically, he never gets sick. And I'm like, I know. And but I could look back on myself and just even shame the way that I didn't parent well. And I think that as we get older and have that space to reminisce, we can ruminate over stories that just either aren't true or our kids don't care. Like they aren't holding up to that.
You're exactly right.
So, but
Teach it, sister.
Yeah.
if it is something that, for, the listener just feeling like, that experience with my dad and him apologizing, he's on his deathbed. And I could have shamed him for asking that question, and he would have died feeling shamed. I wanted to leave space for him to say, I see you, and I'm sorry that you feel that way, Dad, but I want you to know I love you. And we've had good, hard conversations. Like we're good.
Yeah.
And so that's the part of it. If we're living to get to the other side of it, we'll always be disappointed. It's the difference between living in cycles and breaking cycles is choosing to live life in a path that ebbs and flows. And it's going to have easy passes and really difficult ones, but you won't have to repeat the same path over and over again, because each step, whether it's grief, fear, blame, shame, whatever cycle that you have broken through, you're giving yourself tools to just take a different direction to keep learning rather than doing the same behavior over and over and again and expecting different results.
Right.
Yeah.
So well said.
So well said. One more question, I think, is all I have.
I might have one, but go ahead.
Okay.
Or we'll find out if it's the same one.
This is more of a comment. First of all, I already told you I love your guys' authenticity and vulnerability. Justin, I love it when you said I'm emotional and I get choked up. I come from a family of men that is like that, 3 brothers and a dad who we were just talking about at a family dinner last night, just how all the men in my family get so choked up and, and my sons are all the same. And I have 3 boys and a daughter.
I have the same.
I would say our daughter is probably the one that is the toughest of them in that way. I mean,
You didn't talk about me.
oh yeah, he's not really crying. He's actually just in the last few years has finally
Right.
gotten to a
Well,
place.
after I've been unpacking everything that we've talked about in my own life, we've
Yeah.
gotten to the root of things.
Yeah, that has changed Steve drastically, where he actually can get choked up. So anyway, I love that. It's great. The other piece that I loved about your vulnerability is you talked about your experiencing going to Colorado and figuring out what your next step was going to be after you lost your church and yada, yada, yada. And I found myself all of a sudden crying as I read the chapter because, well, a couple reasons. I mean, we have, when they told you to put out your list and of all the different things that have happened to you and all this stuff, and I was picturing myself doing that, and that could be very overwhelming because suddenly you have to look at it all in front of you.
Yeah.
But the difference between Trisha, you saying, "Yeah, all I see is a crap show," and the guy who was talking to you saying, well, what I see is resilience. And that just hit me. I have not been able to, I don't have a word of the year every year, but this year I've just been kind of like, I don't really think I have one and whatever. And we talk about resilience all the time, like all the time in our podcast, in our speaking.
We use John Eldridge's Pause app and his book, Being Resilient. It played a huge factor in my life and in the lives of many that we share it with.
And for whatever reason, when I read that in your book, it would just resonated more than ever with me. And I thought maybe that's my word this year is that. So I just really appreciated all of that and just, again, appreciate your guys' vulnerability.
I'm going to make one more pitch for the book and close with a question. Y'all need to get a copy of this book. You better go on Amazon right now. Read it right there. I'm holding it up. See what that says right there? One choice away from change and things. Where was I going to go next? So here's my closing question for y'all to answer. So I can imagine someone's listening to our podcast and we talk about this transparency and surrendering and all this stuff. And like, it's just like, eating some chocolate ice cream or whatever, like, boy, this is the easiest thing in the world to do. But we have also run across couples in counseling and even listeners who, you know what, if I've got to unpack my past, there's too much trauma or scary stuff there. No way. I don't care. I'm not doing that. I don't care what it brings to my family. I'm just going to, wall up and whatever. You mentioned that breaking cycles begins with one choice. And it's like, what is one of those choices, or what is that one choice that you could speak to those people to nudge them in the direction of like, hey, this is the choice and here's what we have to offer. Well, how would you answer that?
Yeah, that's really the heart of the book, is to take away the decision fatigue that we all feel when we think about changing, especially relationships that are longstanding relationships that we know the history of and we've tried to change in the past. And so, not to be self-promoting, but the first choice would be buy the book. No,
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
But I think, really we want the reader to feel like this is not designed for you to do all at once.
Exactly.
This is a journey that God is inviting you to go on, and rather than a formula for you to figure out.
Right.
And to take that pressure off. And if you look at people all throughout Scripture, God brought transformation in different ways. Sometimes it was immediate. sometimes it was over the course of many, many years and through a lot of different failure and heartache. And so everybody's story is different. And so not comparing your story of transformation to ours. The reason that we share some of our heartache and some of our story in the book is to let the reader know that God can overcome anything. And so no matter what you are going through, or no matter what challenge you do feel like is in front of you, he's got it. He sees it. And his heart is to empower you and equip you to make that choice that he can then bring transformation. Yeah.
I would even say this, if you're listening out there and you've got some hidden secrets or things going on that you have not shared with anybody on this earth, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, Stephen, Julia, Justin, and Trish, I hear what you're saying. I'll get the book. You don't have to go full throttle into just whatever. You can take a small step and go, you know what? I think maybe I will look up and get a referral for a good Christian therapist and just share privately with them in the confines of that, where they keep it confidential, and let them help hold your hand through things as you read a book like this and things. And you don't have to do it all. I think of Nate Bargatze. You don't have to do it all one fell swoop. I don't think you really understand what one fell swoop means. Doesn't have to be done in one fell swoop. Life is a journey. And I come from the part of like going, you know what? Psalm 139, God's been to every day of our life before we were ever born. I don't know about y'all out there listed here, but the Davises and the Cummings, we're like going, I want to know what those days look like when I allow the Holy Spirit to transform me and take away all this shame and fear and do the work and let me surrender, because there's some fun days ahead too. It's not just all, petering out, but there's a lot of blessing and a lot of joy, but you got to turn inward and surrender and stuff. So yeah. Justin and Trish, thank you so much for being with us. I feel like we got some question.
Before we go, I want to give you the opportunity to do a shameless plug for yourself for whatever is going on next.
Yes, shameless plug. Here we go.
Okay, so you can find us on Instagram at Refine Us. You can find us on our website. You can just go to justinandtrisha.com. It'll take you to our website. We have a bunch of resources there. We'd love to help equip you in whatever stage of parenting or relationship you might be in.
Good. Are any speaking engagements coming up? Any conferences?
Yeah, so we're speaking at several different churches. All across. I'm actually looking at a list right now. We were actually
coming down to Georgia at all.
So we're going to be in Ohio. We'll be in Illinois. We're going to be in Colorado.
I think it's on our. Is it on our?
It's on our. It's on our website.
Okay.
Go to our speaking tab.
We'll put a link to the website, so all you who are listening, don't panic. We're gonna everything that Justin just mentioned. There are gonna be links in the show notes here and things like that. So
yeah, we'd love to hear you speak if you're ever in Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were actually just there. We have some friends that lead a church just outside of Atlanta. We were there last February.
Okay.
So we don't have any.
What church is that?
One church.
I don't know.
Forget what. Like
said outside of Atlanta.
There's a bunch of little suburbs around. They're on the south. Yeah. They're kind of down by the airport.
Okay.
Down in that area. So
yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Okay.
Now are we?
Yeah. Now you can plug us. Yeah.
Well, there's nothing to plug for us.
Oh yeah.
Is there?
True. No,
everybody, we love the fact that Julie and I had a chance to speak at the Grandparenting Summit a couple of weeks ago in Birmingham, and our breakout session is going to be available. We'll try to get a link from the ministry to do that. But love that we have a book coming out. In fact,
a journal.
Yeah, it's a journal. So we've done 13 principles for having a healthy relationship with your adult child. So hopefully that becomes available, and we'll put a link to that because then we're going to be published authors. We got to catch up to these guys. They have a couple of books out.
That's great. A little different. They're David C. Cook.
There we go.
We're self-published.
Yeah, we're self-published too. We got to start somewhere.
Great. That's great.
We got to start somewhere, but
of course, I pray it just bananas. So
I feel like we got some good best friends. So whenever we head towards Indianapolis, we're gonna have to
we would get in touch with you guys.
Go out to dinner and stuff like that. But Justin and Trish, thank you so much for being on the Parent Pivot podcast. It has been a real blessing to have this conversation, and we hope you sell many, many copies. Not just copies of the book. We're not talking about this in terms of money, but in terms of influence to bring healing. So mom and dad of adult children, this is all intended as ministry. Please hear our four hearts here. It's designed to bring ministry to you and healing to your hearts so you can have better, healthy relationship with your adult children and pivot well. So guys, thanks for being with us on the Parent Pivot podcast.